Доброго дня.
Greetings, fellow colleagues, all those joining us offline and online. We start the press conference on this major issue: is the government developing a policy for victims of war. Now, this event is organized by the Human Rights Coalition, all those dealing with the victims of war, including the Human Rights ZMINA, NGO Donbas SOS, NGO Crimea SOS, Charitable Fund Right to Protection, Charitable Foundation EAST-SOS, NGO Civil Holding Group of Influence, Charitable Foundation Stabilization Support Services, and Crimean Human Rights Group. My name is Maria Krasnenko, and I'll be moderating our press conference. We have invited Violeta Artemchuk. She's the coordinator of the NGO Donbas SOS, Ksenia Hatz, advocacy coordinator of the Charitable Fund Right to Protection, Olha Skripnik, head of the board of the Crimean Human Rights Group, and Alona Lunyova, advocacy director of the Human Rights Centre ZMINA. A year ago, on the 18th of September 2024, exactly the same coalition was publicly voicing its concerns regarding the disbandment of the Ministry of their integration of temporary occupied territories. And the coalition has pointed to a number of risks due to the disbandment of the ministry and the division of those authorities among other ministries and agencies, and voicing the concerns that the matters of victims, of IDPs, of those individuals located in temporary occupied territories will not be on the agenda. And we have seen small risks or certain risks. After a month since our statement, there was a clear understanding of where we are going currently. As of September 2024, we can see the changes in the government, and there is a presentation of kind of an action plan of a new government under the chairmanship of the new prime minister. So here's this question: whether the new government can see those priorities. I would like to ask the first question to Ksenia Hatz. So this action plan of the government that was just recently presented and even more approved, and the coalition of the organization was also sending them some proposals on the victims of war. These are absolutely public proposals. You can see them posted on the website, whether they've been taken into account in those action plans. So, Ksenia, please, you have the floor. First and foremost, I want to say that when the coalition of the organization dealing with the victims were submitting their proposals, we were focusing on two major aspects. First, to ensure the comprehensive system of support to ensure the protection of rights of the victims, and they need to integrate the matter of the protection of the rights of those citizens residing in temporary occupied territories into the action plan. Having analyzed the action plan of the government approved on the September 10, I can say that the majority of the proposals of the coalitions were not taken into account. And since this document is a strategic program, which is a roadmap for the government, it will define the life of our country for the next 2 years in terms of the establishment and implementation of the state policy. We have carefully analyzed this action plan. What I would like to focus your attention to is as follows. The action plan of the government contains 12 priorities that provide for further details to be elaborated by the ministries, with some criteria, with some deadlines to be established by the ministries. But the matter of the protection of the rights of the victims of war, it's being distributed all over the action plan and program. It's over 100 pages, and the protection of the rights of the victims is distributed among different ministries, and the action plan provides for no coordination mechanisms, which brings up certain concerns in terms of how this interagency coordination will be arranged in terms of the protection of the human rights for the victims of the war. Looking at the priority number 10, that is the recovery priority. Now, that priority provides for the establishment of a recovery fund the recovery plan and special programs to return those Ukrainians who went abroad. Now, what's interesting is that this priority covers only those Ukrainians who went abroad. At the same time, the government never mentions the citizens of Ukraine currently located in temporarily occupied territories, and we're talking about 3 to 5 million people, according to different estimates, plus there's 1 million of children. So what we can see that the action plan of the government, the residents of the temporarily occupied territories are not taken into account in terms of the recovery of Ukraine, which voices even more concerns. Once again, the coalition of the organizations dealing with the protection of the human rights of the victims, and it includes a variety of organizations. We've presented in Rome this statement that was supported by over 100 of civil organizations and NGOs, and the statement clearly mentioned that the interests and the rights of the citizens of Ukraine in TOT should be taken into account while doing any plans for the recovery programs. But from what we can see, the current action plan of the government mentions no no citizens in those plans. And if we'll analyze the action plan, we'll see that the whole plan is all about the implementation of a series of projects and taking certain regulations. Now, what the action plan is lacking is the reinforcement and development of the human capital, because we understand this is the priority in the frames of the recovery. Should we take a look at level of different ministries, the 5th operational goal of the Ministry of Justice, which is called ensuring the access to justice under conditions of the armed aggression, it's only about extending the free of charge legal assistance to the victims of war, to the affected population, to the survivors of the war crimes and things like that. So we can see that the access to justice has a very narrow kind of wording. Should we take a look at the programs and program goals of the Ministry of Development, there's some important initiatives in the frames of increasing the compensatory mechanisms and the national compensatory procedure for the citizens who have their housing still in the TOT areas, but all the programs are about the physical recovery. They're not oriented, they're not focused on this affected population. Now, should we talk about some positive things? That's the operational goal number 4 in supporting victims of the war. And it mentions the possibilities of internal displacement. And in accordance to Law 4071 on the accounting of information on the damages to the non-material rights, it mentions 16 categories of the inflicted damage. This list is not full, is not complete. And we can see that the program mentions several categories: the IDPs, the veterans, the service personnel, partially POWs and partially children. But at the same time, all categories of the affected population or victims are not being taken into account, which is a big challenge, as I believe. In conclusion, I would like to say that should we take a look at the Ministry of Social Policy, just the same thing. There's important initiatives, the presentation of a new social code, funding till the 31st of December, of the social services and the account of the state budget, the so-called national social services, then the funding of the resilience centers, but at the same time the critically important initiative on ensuring the accounting of information on the damage inflicted to non-material rights is not mentioned, which is a challenge. If we take a look at the strategic goals of the Ministry of Veterans, the operational goals of the Ministry of Veterans are kind of as follows. They are prioritizing the service personnel, which is very important, veterans as well, but the Ministry of Veterans is forgetting about the civilians and the victims of war who were inflicted some damages as the result of the war, and it's being deprioritized in the operational goals of the Ministry of Veterans. So what I see is that the civil society needs to kind of reinforce that the action plan of the government should have a separate strategic goal on ensuring the protection of the rights of the victims of war and the population affected by the war. And we need to establish a separate dashboard to monitor the implementation of this program, because we understand the goals are very ambitious. There is a lot of those goals, the deadlines are very small, so we do need to monitor the implementation condition in real time. And the operational goal should not be that abstract in terms of protecting the rights of the victims of war. So in reference of the kind of the transformation of the Ministry of Integration, this is something we keep saying, we have to institutionalize the establishment of the policy for transitionary justice. Thank you, Ksenia. Thank you for underlining the fact that the action plan in the context of victims of war is slightly fragmented. My next question goes to Alona Lunova. This fragmentation, as we have it for now, with regards to the victims of the war and the fact that the action plan could be considered as, the final point in developing the policy that's been taking place over a decade, and the start of a new policy for the next 2 days. So I would like to ask you, what was the policy to the victims of war in the previous year, and can we say that the action plan of the government as we have it right now is the result of this policy, and what should be happening in order for the coordination and direction in this direction would be taking place indeed, so that the victims of war would be truly on the agenda of the government and the authorities? Greetings, colleagues. As Ksenia has already mentioned, that having read the action plan and the program of the government, we can see that there is no program being formulated in the area. And I believe this is the result of the governmental reshuffling a year ago. But in fact, the reshuffling that started in the beginning of 2025. And despite the lack of definition to the victims of war in the national legislation, already after 11 or 12 years of war, we can say that it includes IDPs, residents of the TOT, people who went abroad, missing people, civilian POWs, children affected by the war, and these are millions of people. Now, whether these millions of people facing with the consequences of war, facing with these true damage to their health, to their property, whether they should be considered a priority for the state amidst the ongoing aggression, as we are saying that Ukraine is affected by the war. I believe that they should be part of this war. Before the liquidation, before the disbandment of the Ministry of Integration, at least we knew whom to contact to whenever we are talking about on the need to implement certain actions or the policy directed to the victims of war. After the disbandment of the Ministry of Integration, kind of the requests from the society stayed and the challenges stayed, so we did not resolve the challenges resulting from the war. And if we did not resolve those challenges, then there should be some tools to provide coordination or kind of mutual compensation of certain policies. So if we don't have one responsible ministry and different policies are being distributed in ministry, there has to be still some coordination tools, because whenever we're talking about the support to the victims or the affected people, we shouldn't be forgetting about the people who were get them damaged. We have this system of support to different categories of people, but we don't have support of people affected by war crimes, by tortures, for example. There is a certain support and a separate law to support the individuals affected by the conflict-related sexual violence. And that means that the national policy has to be coordinated. We need to understand the gaps. We need to fill those gaps. But as Ksenia has mentioned, I will kind of reiterate that the system of the registration of damages to non-property rights, to damages to educational rights, to medical rights, etc., it had to be collected by the Ministry of Social Policy in accordance to the law that was passed and adopted in 2024. This system is not existent in 2025. The framework law introducing the support measures to the victims of the war is still non-existent. It was a task for the Ministry of Social Policy, and based on the action plan, it's not a priority for them for the next 2 years. We understand that MPs are skeptical to this program, that this is something, topical, but this is a way the government could show the society for about their priorities for the next 2 years. So it's critical for us that the matter of the victims of the war would be identified not at the level of narrow tasks for the certain ministries, but we need to have some systemic solutions for the victims of the war. So what should be the policy? It has to be systematic, it has to be coordinated, it has to take into account all the categories of victims. We need to map those categories, we need to understand who's outside of the scope of attention, whether we have a single systematic approach to victims, to who they are. I think 2 years ago, the Ombudsman Office were developing a strategy on the support of the victims. It was not approved. It was not implemented by the government, and I believe such strategic documents are very important. It is also important not to forget the responsibilities lost as the result of the disbandment, like the responsibilities for transitional justice, etc. We have analyzed the authorities that were lost as the result of the disbandment. We believe this is one of the tasks for the government to understand what we have lost over this year, which authorities, which functions are not being performed by the government, so that we would be able to implement these policies in future. We were against the disbandment of the Ministry of Integration. We were talking about the risks. And after a year, we can say that the cooperation interaction policy and the policy to support the victims in different policies, not in one separate policy, and the matter of supporting the victims, it should be the central point. So despite the government did not take into account our proposals and their activities, so hopefully they will take into account the interests of millions of victims or affected population. Thank you, Alona, for your statements regarding the lost authorities after the disbandment of the Ministry of Integration. Just to remind you, we have respective publications posted on the website, so the officials of the government can verify the job that we've done. And thank you for focusing our attention to the work being done in the previous years, talking about the all matters related to the victims of war, the strategies, the housing strategy for IDPs, and the whole other complex of documents that were elaborated but unfortunately wasn't implemented and maybe even forgotten for now. My next question goes to Olha Skripnik. Well, should we take a look at certain categories of the victims of war, we can definitely say and maybe even complement the answer regarding the need to review the policy and political approaches and maybe some legislative approaches. Greetings, Maria. Thank you for your attention to this event, because it's truly becoming like a TV series model, because a year ago we were talking about this and now we are raising these questions once again. Unfortunately, there's not too many changes for the better. Those concerns we had a year ago regarding the disbandment of the key ministry, all of them came true. So today we're not talking about the risks, but the absolutely real consequences for the real war. We are talking about the victims and affected population, and the fact that this new program of the government contains no integral policy towards the affected population. And you won't even hear about the residents or the citizens of the TOT. Many of the ministries are not mentioning this, even though it's an enormous amount of people who won't be able to get support anywhere else but in Ukraine. So Ukraine needs to fight for them. And this is the result of the disbandment of the Ministry of Integration. Should we take some specific victims and we focus on political detainees and civilian detainees also as the result of aggression, and which is taking place for 11 years. It's not something that happened yesterday, so the state knows about this challenge for many years and it had different ways to respond to that, and we have a separate law on the protection of people detained as the result of the aggression. So I would like to speak about these people. It is a very specific category of the victims. So talking about the civilians, it's not that significant category. I mean, like comparing to IDP. So this category, which is not that sizable, but still there is no clear response in the program for them. This document, it's not just, the document for the ministries to take a look at that. This is also a document that is sort of a communication with the society, and so society wants to see something in that document, whether the detained civilians will see any answers for their questions. They will not. So it's not only about the implementation of the policy, it's about the connections that we have to those people. For example, this category of people detained as the result of the aggression, we call them civilian detainees or civilian refugees. It is only directly mentioned in the goals of the Ministry of Development. As it happens so that after the disbandment of the Ministry of Integration, part of the authorities went to the Ministry of Unity, but this sad story about them, and part of that went to the Ministry of Development. And this is the only place for clearly mentioning this category, but only in the statement that they will support the work of the board that would be dealing with establishing the status for those individuals. And this is the only mechanism that allows the people to receive at least some sort of a financial support from the state. We're talking about civilian detainees who escaped the captivity, and it also relates to their relatives who are still held. And this happens for years, but the work of this board is not solving these questions faced by those detainees, because the commissioner of the board only states the fact, and what the ministry can be doing. It's only the payment of this 100,000 that could be received by those individuals, but people are facing a lot of challenges, and nobody except for the state can support that. I mean, those 100,000, even if the person would receive that, and in case of civilians, it's hard for them to prove this fact, because people after captivity, after tortures, they don't get a certificate from the occupiers saying that they were kept in prison by the occupying forces for a certain period of time. So it's hard for them to prove the fact. But even with this decision of the committee or commission, they're facing with other challenges like housing. In case of housing, well, there's no mentioning of this category of the individuals by the state. How we're going to implement that and support them as housing, that's not clear. And fortunately, we have several dozens of civilians being returned, and we can see that the state is still kind of manually trying to solve those matters, how to provide them as housing. Part of the people have their housing in occupied territories. Part of them have still housing here, but they don't want to live in the communities where they lived before. That is the reason for that. But the program of the government doesn't mention that. Another question, which is kind of clear that there's a need for dental support, psychological support, etc. So, should you take a look at the goals of the Ministry of Health, you would think that you'll find this category of people and their support. But unfortunately, it's not. So it's not clear how those medical services would be provided. Even though we have part of the documents being elaborated for that, but still this category is not mentioned in those documents. And the Ministry of Social Policy, which is which should be taking care of this category of the victims who are very much vulnerable. It only mentions certain actions with regards to children affected by the deportation or the transfer, but there's no civil detainees, even though they require this support, they require some accompanying. And we have the support to the veterans, but the civil detainees, particularly in the first period after their return, they need some support as well. You've heard about people who returned just recently, and they've been kept in prison since 2017, 2018. People are coming, they don't understand what the DA is. They don't know how smartphones look like because they spent 6, 7, or 9 years in prison. There's people returning who spent 11 years in Russia's prison. I mean, that's under total propaganda. The people, they don't know some basic things. They need the support, but we don't see that mentioned in the priorities of the government, which is wrong. This is the category of the people that we are aware of for 11 years, and I think with all the experience we have, we should be elaborating certain mechanisms, and there are some as well. And the key thing that should be solving those challenges are the amendments to the law on the protection of the detained individuals, the law that had been passed even before the full-scale war. So that law could not comply with the realities of our nowadays. So the number of POWs or civil detainees affected by the tortures, by the detainment, it's enormous. So this law has to be changed. So what we wanted to see is the government to establish this draft law, but this is the initiative currently of the NGOs that are asking for the changes to this law to simplify some things, to help our people to clearly understand the victims and the categories, because the commission is not just, it's not the solution to all the people. Leona has mentioned the category of people, victims of tortures. I mean, they have nowhere to go, because it's not a conflict with sexual violence. So this is the number of people who are affected by the tortures, but they don't know where to go completely. The last challenge, and it's kind of surprising that we keep talking about this challenge for many years. We were talking about the coordination, but we can see there's so many resources, and the attention of the state goes to digitalization of services, of informing, etc. I mean, we can do so much things through DIA, whether we want it or not, but still there's access to everything. But imagine the relatives with parents or children being detained. So they have to go to commission, to police, to security service of Ukraine, to other agencies, and then to solve all the questions by themselves. Now, those relatives are also in different conditions. Some of them in TOT, some of them are abroad, so they don't have a single window, a single point of contact. I mean, previously it was the Ministry of their Integration who could be accumulating this information. But now, at the level of the government, there's absolutely no responsible ministry. Now, who can create this single window to coordinate, to simplify the life of those people? Because if you have a relative being detained in prison, that's a tragic story, absolutely. But despite providing them support, instead of providing them support, we are complicating their lives. So with all this experience of digitalization, a successful one, we can't create a single window for the relatives. So they would know that they would be contacted somewhere, submitting their application, would go somewhere. So unfortunately, I haven't seen the simplification of this system mentioned in this action plan, and maintaining the connection to those people currently detained or currently located in temporary occupied territories. I thank you, Olha. Thank you for providing with so many examples to kind of a negative trends that we could see over a certain category of individuals. And a special thanks for those recent statements regarding the digitalization. It shouldn't be just marriage certificates or some other documents. It should be also some help to the victims of war. And it goes... now I would like to pass the floor to Violeta Artemchuk, So my question to you, like over this past year, the victims of the war, the IDP, and the residents of TOTs, and now some other categories, they can feel the connection with the state. Do they feel this connection of the state, or that connection was lost? And the next question that could go to the other participants as well. This coordination at a national level, is that provided? Is that something that exists? Thank you for this question. We actively communicate with people. I mean, there's the wide category of the victims of the war. So whether the government is developing policy for the victims of the war, the previous speakers, they kind of through the statements that they've delivered, they were kind of mentioning that the policy is not being developed. It's fragmentary. Every policy, every strategy, every law has some kind of end users. So talking about the victims of war, that's a wide category of people, and they are the end users for all of those established policies and the laws. As already mentioned, this category of victims is a wide category. There's a lot of people with different needs, with different questions and aspirations. It could be the people residing close to the area of active combat operation. They think whether they should leave or whether they should resettle. Or it could be a person residing on the TOTs, but who still remain a citizen of Ukraine, who still gets the pensionary payments. That could be different questions that they have. It could be a child with the IDP status, just enrolled into the university, and they're facing with some questions. So I'm giving a list of those categories, and there's many, many more of them. But every category has its own peculiarities, and then might have different questions, and would be surely they are interested in having those answers to the questions. They're reading in Telegram channels, they're reading the news about some statement that's being made by the government about the payments. So as conscious people, and I think, some of the people are truly conscious, they want to verify the information in Telegram channel. They want to receive some information how they could be part of the program of payments, or how they could receive like a fuel to support the heating season in winter. So what these people are doing, they want to go somewhere to verify the information they heard. Now, before the disbandment of the Ministry of their Integration, there was a hotline. And in the beginning of this establishment of the hotline, we had a very tight contact with this hotline. And like every person with some needs who considered itself a victim of a war, they can contact it. They can contact this hotline and get an answer to different questions. Now, the hotline exists, but as the result of the distribution of the functions in between of the ministries. Now, what could be the impact to the end user? You can contact 1548 line, and with the question about evacuation, let's say. So people are trying to answer those questions the way they could, but still. Then the evacuation of relatives, and then there is the question, like, I'm going to send my child to the school. To have like any preferences as the IDP, so that my child would be taken to school. That's already the Ministry of Education. So the hotline says, like, you should address that to the Ministry of Education. And here's the cell phone. you can contact them. The Ministry of Health has a lot of directions, and the victims of the war is only one of these directions. So they are kind of referring the person to some other sections of departments of the Ministry of Health, and they're saying like you should contact here and there and everywhere. And if there's another question, if the person contacting the hotline would have another question, it'll be referred to another agency, also having a lot of functions. So this person would need to jump in between of the offices or departments. And this is a very painful question because that kind of demotivates, that leads to frustration, and that the end user of the policy is not feeling himself or herself like in the center of things. And it's like, oh, we kind of, nobody needs us or something like that. So from what I described, you might think that this single window, it's difficult to create. There cannot be universal soldiers aware of the answers to all the questions, but still, it's not that difficult because our hotline's been working since 2014. We provide consultations on different matters. We can do that, but still, there has to be a state hotline. We can do a lot, but we're only the NGO. I'm not saying that this is the only window that the person considering himself a victim of the war can get the ample answers to the questions, because the legislation on the victims of war is different. At a certain point there will be a referral, but at least the overall coordination, at least the first steps, that should be provided. We have lost this communication. I think the state has lost its communication with the victims after the disbandment of the Ministry of their Integration, which is not positive. So hopefully this information channel should be one of the first actions to be implemented. I thank Violeta. Thank you for focusing the need to maintain connection so that the victims of the war would be really feeling they are required by the nation. Before the final set of questions to your panelists, I have this question whether the audience have any questions. I mean, any of those joining us offline, do you have any questions to the panelists, or maybe the organizer have any questions, or maybe we have any questions online? You can raise your hand and just give us a sign that you have something to ask. Okay, if not, I have a final question to all of you. I think many of us have a lot of questions in their hand, and even more questions. Why is that happening? So the final question, what is the key message that you would like to give to the government, and more specifically to the Prime Minister, in terms of the topic that we have raised to say, whether the government is developing this policy and how it should be doing like that? Just a couple of statements addressed to the Prime Minister, because she's the main person responsible for that in the government. Anyone ready, please take the microphone and share your thoughts. I would draw your attention to the fact that the effectiveness of the governmental operations, just like as the effectiveness of the implementation of the current policy, it could not be measured by the number of investment policies or the number of the laws approved. Instead, the effectiveness of the government can only be measured through the real impact on human lives, improving access to services, ensuring justice, restoration of kind of the rights being violated. I don't have this feeling that we're kind of, mourning around the disbandment of the Ministry of their Integration for a year. We're okay about the changes, but they shouldn't be for the worse. They shouldn't be affecting the lives of the people affected by the war, already affected by the war. Unfortunately, what we can see, it's just kind of a recoil in the policy related to the residents of TOT. We can hear conversations about the disbandment of the agencies dealing with the TOT, or the visions on the TOT that we are currently in the process of negotiation, so let us wait. But there should be no pause in maintaining connections with the residents of those territories. So my statement, the changes should go only for the better. The victims of the war should be seeing themselves in the priorities of the government, talking about some real changes. If the government has already has come to make some positive changes, well, the protection of the rights of the victims is something that is crucially important. We need to allocate resources, we need to take the coordination, because not a single ministry would be able to implement the policy on occupied territories or the victims of war, the affected population by itself. So there has to be certain priorities for the state. Now, Olena, please. Thank you for the question. It is important indeed. And I have two key messages to share. The first one, it's kind of realistic. The war continues, and it will continue for a certain period of time. It means that there will be more and more victims and affected population. The number of unsolved challenges that we've mentioned, it will increase. And Ukraine is the country, it's the nation that has spilled its own blood for making sure that we will do everything for our own citizens, and we are grateful to the armed forces of Ukraine for one more day of life. Now that struggle continues, that fight continues for the lives of their people, so we shouldn't be turning back and going into different directions. And the millions of people who became victims of the war, including millions of people on the TOT, they required these certain specific actions. And the next statement is that we are open to cooperation. We are going public so that we'll be heard, so that they will hear us, because this is our joint course. Our call is that we're open to cooperation. We're ready to share the experience we have. We're happy to provide the support to the state in order to make sure we're not even further increasing these challenges that are available to the people, meaning that we are always open. We are happy to support the state if the state is willing to take this support. Violeta, please. Yes. Olha just took the words out of my mouth. Whether we're ready to support this is something that I wanted to say. The ministries, at the level of the ministries, well, if they have any questions of applied nature on how to implement something, we're ready to take those questions. So one of the things I just wanted to say that while doing any plans or any changes that have an impact on the victims, there will be changes like that. Now, planning, it's important that we plan how to inform the affected people on those challenges. There's a lot of initiatives that are not aware, that people are not aware of, because it's important to think how do you spread the information. Thank you, Violeta. Now, in conclusion of our conversation, I would like to underline once again and try not to take the words out of someone's minds. The coalition has many years of cooperation with different ministries and state agencies. We unfortunately had to work with different formats of ministries, and so definitely the institutional memory preserved within the people mentioned here or presented here on the panel and in this coalition, it constitutes a very significant experience, and we're all ready to share this experience for the benefit of the country. Once again, I would like to underline the importance of this cooperation for the sake of improving the situation for the victims of the war. For all those audience watching us online and offline, just want to remind the coalition is ready to cooperate with different stakeholders, including the journalists, the activists, in order to develop our country. develop our country and develop this support for the victims of war. Please review those materials that we publish on regular basis. We are making roadmap for the Ukrainian Parliament on regular basis. We're working on the action plan for the government and some other topical documents that would be much of an interest to many people and those interested in this topic as well. And unfortunately to those who are affected by the war and those feeling the consequences of the war. We thank you for your involvement, for the interest to the topic, and we keep on working. Thank you.